All right, everybody. Peace and blessings. We are so glad to have you back. I am Taya Bolton, your producer for Aspire Conversations, and I want to welcome you back to another session. Aspire Conversations is a solution-focused series dedicated to addressing systemic injustices that impact the Black business community. The series was birthed out of the Black Lives Matter movement, which for Aspire turned into a Black Businesses Matter movement. The sessions will include special guests always who are policymakers, small business owners, and other community leaders. At the end of each session, we pull together a call to action because we don't want these conversations to be in vain. We ask that you join us in moving that particular action forward so that we as a community can make impactful change and shift the mindsets. The time for transformation is now, and we need you. To see schedules and register for future sessions, we invite you to definitely check out the website, which is aspirecommunitycapital.org/Aspire Conversations. And the series will run through February 2021. Today's session is on the role of church in community and economic development. Without any further ado, I want to go ahead and get things turned over to the CEO, Manuel Campbell.
And thank you for that wonderful introduction, Taya. Again, I'm the CEO of Aspire Community Capital, Manuel Campbell, and we have a dynamic panel as well as a great leader who's moderating our conversation today. I'm so excited to kind of hear from each of them and the perspective they bring around, just the role of both spirituality and the church as well in economic as well as community development. It is a pleasure for me to introduce someone who really needs no introduction, but Don Thomas Jr., who will moderate this conversation. And anytime I have the opportunity to introduce someone, I always go out and kind of read their LinkedIn profile. And I think Don's LinkedIn profile really speaks to the essence of who he is, in particular the very first sentence in his LinkedIn profile. And it describes, and I quote, transformation-oriented practitioner and project manager offering expertise in systems thought, macro community development, and organizing. And I think that that's the quintessential essence of who Don really is. I consider myself a friend of Don's. I consider myself one of his comrades in this fight against poverty and economic justice for all. And I'm happy to have him lead this conversation. And I look forward to a lively conversation. Thanks, Don, and I'll hand it over to you.
Outstanding. Thank you, Manuel. I definitely want to say that you are definitely a comrade. Taya, you too. It's an honor to partner with Aspire Community Capital for their astute understanding of the times and season that we find ourselves currently existing, and for hosting such a timely dialogue. And so I'm excited and grateful to facilitate a conversation with such an esteemed panel, folks who are brilliant in many regards. Today we have with us Sam Frowine with the Performance Group. We have Bishop Claude Alexander with the Park Church. And lastly, and definitely not least, we have Mr. Marifa Ukwele of the League of Intelligence. I would like to give each of you a minute to introduce yourselves, starting with Marifa and then Bishop Alexander, and then we'll move to Sam.
As Don Thomas would say, peace and blessings, everybody. Good to see everybody. I want to thank Aspire and Taya and Don Thomas and Brother Emmanuel for allowing me to visit everybody on the platform and share some of my thoughts. My name is Marifa Ukwele. I am the founder of League of Intelligence. Primarily, we conduct history classes throughout the community to educate folks on Black people's history prior to slavery, something that's not shared in our school system even to this day. And we believe that the psychology of our people has to change so that the outside things that we see every day, those things can change. But we want a mindset shift first. So that's why we engage in a social science called history. And we've been doing this for about 5 years now. We're happy to be on the panel. Right now, COVID-19 is happening, so we don't have our live classes in person at the moment, but we will be launching a virtual style class coming up 2021. So thank everyone for having us. And I'm ready to go, Don. I'm ready.
Appreciate you, good brother. Bishop Alexander.
Claude Alexander, pastor of the Park Church here in Charlotte, North Carolina. To save time for discussion, I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Short and sweet, appreciate that. Mr. Sam Frowine.
Yes, I'm Sam Frowine, and it's an honor to be amidst you all and listening to what you're stirred up about. So I'm eager to enter in. I suppose the most qualifying thing I could put in front of you is I'm just a survivor of business ownership. I live every day in the trenches of working with business owners. I have three businesses that are sort of expressions of that. One is a consultancy, another a capital company involved in investing in private enterprise and then mentoring that into some kind of reality. And then a third is an institute where when you're at my age and point, you've written a lot of notes and eventually you organize them and hope that someone will read them. And so I have an institute that actually has all that together in order to scale and create value for private business. I believe deeply in the value of private business as it relates to exactly the kind of the issues you all are after, which is how do we liberate circumstance by creating economics and do so in a responsible way. My greatest concern and value or thing I care most about is something called the Kingdom Builder, which is something about connecting faith and the secular marketplace information. So I'm just glad to be here. Again, my name is Sam.
Thank you so much, gentlemen, for those introductions. If I were in the audience, I would be getting notepads out because I have a feeling that there's going to be some information and some knowledge shared today that's going to carry you. So the role of the church in community and economic development is both an antiquitous debate as well as an appropriate conversation for this moment. And so I would like to start this conversation within the context of relevance. Given the historical context of faith-based organizations and institutions being cornerstones in Black community, I want to provide a series of questions that was posed over 50 years ago by who I would argue is one of the greatest theologians in church history, Reverend Dr. James H. Cone. In his book, The Black Theology and Black Power, Cone wrestles with the relevance of the church in particular to the Black existence and poses a flurry of questions seeking to know this: what the gospel has to say to a man who is jobless and cannot get work to support his family because the society is unjust. What is God's word to countless Black boys and girls who are fatherless and motherless because whites decreed that Blacks have no rights? He would go on to say, unless there is a word from Christ to the helpless, then why should they respond to him? Unless there is a word from Christ to the helpless, why should they respond to him? And how does one relate the gospel of Christ to people whose daily existence is one of hunger or even worse, despair? Or do we simply refer them to the next world? The Black church in particular has been a pillar in Black community, a safe haven, schoolhouse, a revolutionary headquarters, resource centers, etc. The question is, gentlemen, is this still relevant today? And is the church speaking to the people described by Dr. Cone? We can start with Pastor Claude Alexander. You are on mute, Pastor Alexander.
Thank
Pastor, you're still mute. There we
you.
go.
All right. In many ways, you answered it, but I will back it up and say that the Black church has been and continues to be the principal entity of agency for Black people, continues to shape, empower not just spiritual and moral sensibility, but also educational, economic, and political aspirations through actions, through advocacy, instruction, and programs. How is it doing it still? And I would say that oftentimes the church doesn't get noticed because it doesn't do what it does to be noticed. It does what it does to do it and to help people. Continuing as hubs of incubation and innovation directly with young people through CDCs, through Money Smart, that is financial literacy, WINS, Centers for Wealth Building. Mount Carmel was the first, we've been the second. Through partnership with agencies that are more forward and frontal leaning. So I'll start there and we can continue because I know there are others that want to get in on the discussion.
Thank you for that. Sam, how do you feel about the question posed?
Well, just absorbing your opening remarks, um, I have to sort of take my breath and pull it in and contemplate what's behind that and what it represents in the eyes that you have seen the world, and they're different than my eyes, and so I listen to this, and I'm humbled at the very image of people feeling the level of despair you're describing and wondering where the hope is. And then as you started talking some about what has been the survival of the people, your people, the people who are of color that are in the, and I'm going, the Black church is a Black church. Well, the church is the church to me, and that's the church. And I believe in the church. I believe in it with all of my being. I know that that's where God's best is, in my view. And so I absolutely believe that a simple thing I'd say, and it's that when I said before, I build companies, or that's what my life work has been for decades and decades. And that I live in that sense of how you make that work. And first premise of that is I listen to an organization, and I know that if I'll listen, I'll discover resources that if it can be thought about and cooperated with, it can discover something that's never realized it's capable of becoming. Well, when I think about the church, I know there is amazing abundance inside God's body. And it is the critical place to, in my view, embed influence that can affect the very issue you're talking about, the economic realities that have to change in order to make this world a more just and fair place for people to get out of poverty, get out of hardship, and there's real intentional effort that needs to be done. And if that's the place that people trust and have historically trust, it's likely to me a sign that there needs to be more intentionality in developing out that place that I believe is the backbone of trust and opportunity. But it isn't just by color. That's trust that goes way past color to the faith that we share in common. That's just my comment.
Thank you for that, Sam. Brother Marifa, what are your thoughts around the question posed?
This is an interesting question. It's going to open up some pretty in-your-face dialogue, I feel. And I'll start out by quoting Dr. Martin Luther King, who said that our optimism has to be grounded in realism. And I'm hearing, and I've heard for so long, a lot of positive things relative to the church when you connect church, Black folk in particular, with economics. And we'll kind of gloss over things with fancy words, in my opinion. But if we look at the condition of the Black community, I want to make it clear today that I am not impressed at all. I'm not going to sit up here on this panel and speak positively overall about the church impact economically. I will speak positive about the Black church when it comes to our resolve. One thing about our people is that we specialize in spirituality, and our strength comes from our spiritual connection. And when it comes to battling through these difficult conditions that the United States and other European countries have brought on our people, we've done so well when it comes to maintaining and pushing forward. You can't destroy Black people. And our spiritual strength is one of the foundations that keeps us going. So I will speak positively when it comes to the psychological impact of the church on Black people. We're able to sustain and maintain. I love that about us. When it comes to economics, though, I have to be honest. We're not seeing that economic impact relative to the Black community. The Black community is last, as usual, in household income in 2020. And it's been that way for the entire time. We have churches on every single block in our communities, yet we have no economic impact. I understand we're talking about certain programs that we have in place, but even from an educational standpoint, we perform lower than other groups. So I would like to issue a reform and a re-examination of some of our programs within the church, some of our direct direction that we've been going and the things that we've been implementing, and be honest and say, these things need to be improved. These things need to be worked on. Let's ground ourselves in realism, knowing If we focus on these things appropriately, we can then change the outcome and get the kind of desired outcome that we want. But we have to be honest with where we are and the real impact the church has on the Black community. And I think one way, not to take the conversation to another direction, but one way we can do that is examining what type of Christianity we practice and how it came to be introduced to Black people. Because there's two kinds. There's one that was practiced by our ancestors in Ethiopia who were never colonized. And then there's that second version, which was brought by Europeans on that Western side, which ended up leading to our enslavement and colonization and brought us over here to this continent and has us as second-class citizens. So I think a re-examination on the foundation of Christianity for us and a re-examination about our programs that we have in place can take us to new heights. So that's my answer to that.
I appreciate that. Pastor Alexander, I would like you to kind of respond to the notion of the church as a whole not doing enough, the Black church in particular not doing enough to address the economic outcomes outside of potentially the siloed approaches, right? There may be some churches that are doing some things, but how do we speak to the notion of churches on every block and still communities are depraved of the necessary resources to live out their fullness of their humanity?
Well, first of all, I want to say that the church does as much as the people in the church empower and work it to do. Okay, that's number one. The church is an institution, but it is also people. And part of what the church does is to empower people, not just mentally, but physically to make change, as my brother has responded. Secondly, what the church does is seek to do direct programming, whether it's building homes for seniors, whether it is doing job training, such as coding. So an individual, a young person, can make a good living doing computer coding. Now, to the degree that has not been, quote unquote, scaled, okay, that is a fair criticism, okay, partially because of the individuality of churches and the weakening of denominational structures that would allow for such scaling to occur. And so what we have to do better is work in collaboration with other churches and strengthen our denominational systems. Lastly, in response to the notion of which Christianity, first of all, is anchoring it in history, and having a real understanding of the African roots of our faith, going back even to the early Christian fathers. Secondly, recognizing the empowerment that has come out of the genius of having to synthesize. And thirdly, being consistent both in praxis and in teaching. Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Sure.
Sam, I want to ask you this, still kind of keeping in the vein of this conversation. Marifa brought up an interesting point, and Pastor Alexander kind of expounded a bit on the issue of reform. You mentioned in your kind of introduction around your commitment to the church as a whole, your understanding of the abundant resources that the church, that God's body, to quote you, kind of possesses. Within the understanding of those resources, right? What type of reforms that the kind of denominational reform that Pastor Alexander mentioned, I think is a great start. But what type of reforms from a person who creates business, understanding that we all want to be, from a business point of view, in the black at the end of the year? How do we leverage the resources in God's body to have a very tangible impact? And then what are some ideas around scalability that Dr. Alexander mentioned as well?
Well, you're asking such good questions on that, and I want to go back for a moment to Marifa's point, and I so respected, I so respect what he said. There's one thing that you start with. Let's be honest. Let's be real about what we have. Anytime you're looking at how to make something better, you can't go talking about ideology or big dreams without it having practical reality. If you're going to make a business work, you've got to make sure you can pay payroll, which means you have to have economics. I would say a fundamental thing that's just real practical on the earth right here is we're dealing with resource shortage. There's a problem. There's a problem with the realities of the circumstances that many business owners, I'll speak in terms of business ownership, because I think that's Manuel's sort of point of focus is there's not enough. There's not enough access to the opportunities. Customers, that's the capital. You got to have capital to make it work. I won't discount the fact that you absolutely have to have faith to keep pursuing while you're in the desert, but you have to have hope, and hope has something to do with enough resources to believe that you're going to be able to survive on this side of eternity with it. So I get it. I think that, and you're asking for reform, and I'll get real practical. I've put together information that you can have as resource, as off of my companies. I put it into a place called kingdom-builder.org. Just go look and see. I give you information that allows you to enter in the journey, but also create active dialogue in the church with others who are pursuing that journey and preparing yourself to be aligned to getting resources assigned to you in a way that will allow you to break barriers. I believe that if I were to be overly simplistic, just a little glance at things, you can see that there's not enough movement between the cultural categories. There's not enough movement vertically in opportunity. We have to take care of that. The church has a spawning ground, in my view, for innovation and accountability and development of good thought about how to develop out business. But I think it needs resources to help connect it into more opportunities. So I think there's a need, one, to put it in the right place. I think the church has a place for incubating trustworthy thinking and development of ideas of how to pursue one's dream or call, but it needs resources, and those are found in relationships. And intentionality needs to be put on mentoring and pulling through businesses and those who are deciding to pursue that with some amount of intentionality. It needs talent, and it needs money, among other things, and opportunities. That's my first gut reaction when you ask reform. Well, I mean, there's a point when I'm not about to try to explain the situation you have in the circumstance of what it is, feels like it is oppression. Well, I certainly don't desire that. I desire that there be liberty to this, the lid be lifted. Well, that's what I love about the faith body. I know that there are kingdom builders out there who desire to put their hand on other kingdom builders who can break through those barriers. But there's a real need also to have intentional development of entrepreneurs and business owners who can mentor one another and also be mentored by those who can open doors to break some of these barriers. That's just my first reaction.
I appreciate that. I love the fact that you mentioned that faith is good, right? And I believe in the book of James, it would say that faith without works is dead. I would also like to pose this, gentleman, given that everybody may not may have some history with the church, but may not be ascribing to that faith at this point. Is there a role for spiritual leaders to play in economic mobility, right? So, and this is what I'm thinking. I'm thinking, are there alternatives to the church from a spiritual kind of framework to build economic viability in community? And so that'd be one, and then I'll have a follow-up question upon that response. But Marifa, you can start this conversation as well.
So the role of spiritual leaders in the community relative to economics, do they have a role? They absolutely have a role and a responsibility. We've established that the church is the number one institution in the Black community to this day. And so the responsibility and accountability is going to be high. And so what role do they play? What role can they play? I would say the first role when it comes to economics, you can be a beacon or a centerpiece for economic literacy, for knowledge. Outside of your Wednesday service, outside of your Sunday service, or whatever midweek and your Sunday service, you can set up classes. You can Brother Sam here talked about relationships, form relationships with your peers who are seasoned in economics, and provide those classes so that we can get our literacy up, which will affect our dollar at the bottom line. I think that's a huge responsibility that the church should undertake. You're already asking us for our tithe. Is that not correct? You're already asking us for 10% of what we bring in. And so we need the knowledge. Now, I understand there's personal responsibility. It's on you to also get knowledge. But as a leader in this Black community, in the spiritual community, we understand we need economics, economic knowledge, economic literacy, all those things, strategies and tactics to make more money, to be financially independent and wealthy. These classes are necessary. Black people, as I stated before, are last in household income, last. And I want us to take on the attitude, and our leadership to take on the attitude that we're done with that. Our legacy has never been poverty outside of the last 400 years. This is important to understand. We do not come from lack and poverty. That's a condition of oppression brought upon us from another group. Prior to 1600, the African continent and Black people around the globe were in a financial wealthy position. A wealthy position, not only a wealthy position, the wealthiest. This is why two particular groups wanted to invade our areas in the first place, right? So the role they can play is, one, they can establish economic classes. Two, they can ground us in our history so that we can stop thinking we come from the mud, or we come from dirt, or we come from nothing, or we come from slavery. That is not our legacy at all. And I'll keep it short, Don, because I want to get hype already, but I'm going to leave it right there. But if we could spend time on the role they can play. Another role they can play, the last one I'll say, is to protect us from spiritual manipulation, because it was spiritual manipulation that led to our economic downfall. They had the Europeans had the goal was to colonize us, take our economic wealth, and control us politically. The way they got in good with us is to present themselves as spiritual people. So we need our leaders to be able to help us discern the wolf in sheep's clothing, being able to tell people who don't have our good at heart, who are performing a Trojan horse type of strategy, to where we'll see on the outside, but we won't see the agenda that's on the inside. So that's another thing that a role that our spiritual leaders can play. And I'll stop there. Let's get this thing going. I'm ready.
Yeah, that's good.
Thank you. Thank you. So, number one, as I stated at the beginning, churches are doing these things, all of the things that my brother just said, they are doing them as we speak. You can shake your head no, but we are doing them as we speak. Now, the fact that you may not know about it or others don't know does not change the fact that it's not being done. Now, one may say, well, it's not at the scale that it should be. But the point that I need for people to hear is all of the things that were just said are being done. Now, so that's one. And so I confirm what he said, and I say that those things are being done in churches, and I'll give you a list of them. Now, thirdly, in the education part, one of the things that is crucial is changing our relationship with money. For many, it is not that money is not being made. It is how we are relating to the money that we make. Are we being directed by our money, or are we directing the money that we make? Do we actually support Black-owned businesses? Do we actually incent Black businesses to cooperate and purchase from each other? Do we incent the one cement truck operator at one church, the one cement operator truck at another, and the one cement operator at the third, rather than being the one cement truck to become the three cement truck that can go after the deal at the airport? These are things that we also need to be discussing. And then how do we, as Sam said, in collaboration, assist in capital coming to them, and the mentoring and the connecting that helps them scale and grow.
Thank you. Before I go to you, Sam, Marifa, you put in the chat that you wanted to respond.
I would say that and I'm not trying to get you started, Bishop Alexander. I'm just simply saying that it's not to the degree, to the scale, because Don Thomas talked about the scale. And I'm looking at this from the context that the church is the number one institution. Black people do what the church does. Black people do what the church tells them to do. Black people do what the church emphasizes. And what I'm saying is that looking at our history over the past, I don't know how many decades, centuries we want to look at, it has not been effective. It is okay to simply take an examination of the church relationship as it regards to economics and say, we need to make some adjustments. It's okay to critique and say, well, you know what? Those programs we have in place have not been effective on scale in any area. Again, so I think the proper attitude is what Dr. Martin Luther King said from the very beginning, that we should temper our optimism with realism. That the fact that we can achieve the victory in this, we absolutely can do it. It absolutely can be done. But if we keep rebuttaling things and saying, oh, we're already doing those things and these things are already in place, but the outcomes, the numbers say we have, even if we're doing those things, it's not good enough.
Well,
it's not. And so I just want to put the emphasis, and I want to put the urgency on making corrections, making adjustments to be more effective. That's the attitude I wanted to take on.
So if I may, and again, I don't want this to be a back and forth because we really need to go further. One, I wish it was the case that people do what we stress, because we would be a lot further. Second, in terms of the things that we offer, you can offer it, but not everybody takes advantage of it. And that too is an issue. It's not just a critique of whether or not a program has relevance, but do people actually take advantage of those opportunities? So I'll leave it at that because you got some questions and we need to go further on.
So I appreciate that back and forth though. I think it's important to have these conversations so folks can know that it is important to wrestle with outputs versus outcomes and scalability and best practices and all those things. So I think it's important for us to know that. Sam, I have a question for you. You mentioned earlier around, and this question I want to kind of situate within the context of spiritual manipulation. And you mentioned earlier around access, right? We know that the reason that we have these opportunity gaps is because there have been systems, structures, institutions, and otherwise created to intentionally keep folks from having access to certain resources and capital. Given your racial disposition, right, as a white man who has been building businesses for decades, who has access and supports small businesses to access that capital. What is the responsibility of those that have access, those that are gatekeepers to resources in some instances, to protect, who say that they are committed to the broad vision of the church that Christ came to establish? What is the responsibility to ensure that those gatekeepers are also protectors as opposed to perpetuators of the spiritual manipulation by which allows for folks or disallows folks to have access to the necessary resources to move an agenda forward?
A whole lot more than they're doing right now. If you, if yeah, I appreciate listening to Marifa. I just like how he carries on, but his edge is on concluding that there's just, we look at the present and look at the back all the way to the history. We see this very heavy uh, uh, containment of a people that feels intentional and like classic institutional racism as implied by the words, it seems. I listened to the laying it at the feet of the church leaders, and I know what it's been. I know what it's like. I have a little angle of watching a startup church become a pretty big church in Lake Forest, where I was privileged to be in the one of the founding elders of that church. And watching what it's like to handle the difficulties and challenges of being a leader trying to make this huge entity work, and seeing what it is to bring the folks in. And they actually thought they were volunteers, these people who came to the church to be fed. And to me, it was such a disconnect from what they really are, which is a part of the body of Christ that are privileged to be a part of it. I believe we have inside our body bunches of people that have a big responsibility, who are folks of faith, who have grown up in and around the church and understand the depth of what they have received in the spirit of the church, who have a responsibility to deploy resources to intentionally break through some of this as part of brothers and sisters in distress. And before I speak into this with the language of someone who has studied this whole circumstance of racial disparity, I have to say, I don't understand the walk that you have. I don't understand what it's like every day to be going through. However you're viewing it, I just know there's a distinctness of a viewpoint by the fact that we have a difference in the color of our skin. I can see it, right? But I flip to something, though, we have deeply in common, at least those who are in the church, and that is that God doesn't see that color, not like that. God desires that we be unified and of concern for each other. And this whole issue of breaking through a resource paradigm problem it lays at the feet of wealthy kingdom builders in the church who need to do more. And it doesn't matter whether it's inside a bishop's church or whether it's inside a whole denomination it doesn't matter where it is. We need to intentionally reach through these barriers that are bound by the geographic of our church and begin to understand God is a much bigger than a community church builder. I don't know. That's just, and I believe that is, and capital works that way. Capital crosses barriers geographically, but capital wants to trust. And that's what God's given us uniquely, is a community that we can trust in. And so I'm just very certain that this is this condition that you're looking at doesn't just rest in, is the church doing enough, as in the church leader. These church leaders are struggling with enormous demands on the resources. It's the people, the sheep of that church that have been developed and are influencing and affecting resources that need to develop intentional ways to invest in the kingdom. But at the same time, those that are desiring to break through these barriers, and you've named it multiple times, need to become knowledgeable about what it means to steward resources and begin to get incubated and grown up, but under a model that cultivates not just opportunity to make economics, but to use the platform of private enterprise to also connect to their spiritual journey, because it is one and the same, in my view.
Interesting. There's a question, appreciate that, Sam. There's a question from the audience that asks, how does this all translate to the community around the church? This person goes on to ask for examples, looking at the disparities that exist on the Betty's Ford corridor. Given the churches that are represented in that corridor, how does all of this translate to that? I'll leave it to whoever wants to take that question to take.
Sure, I'll start.
Go ahead, Bishop.
Well, one is the necessity of partnerships and collaboration with institutions and developers. That's crucial. As Sam pointed out, the church has trust, it has capacity, and how does it bring that to bear with those who actually do development, right? Who do development work, with those who do healthcare, right? With those who have expertise. So the ability to partner and collaborate. Now that requires both that the church reaches out, but also that entities are willing to partner with churches, right? So it's outreach and it is reaching in. So I'll start. I have more, but I want to give others the opportunity to speak as well.
I will say this, Pastor Alexander, don't cut the people short. If you have more, go ahead and get it out.
Well, no, yeah, I do, but don't worry, I'll come back. I'll come back.
Got you, Brother Marifa.
Bishop, we want you to expound. This is the time. This is the time for it. I'll say that, and I agree with one of the comments. I can see some of the comments as well on my side. We're talking about community engagement, forming these relationships with the community. There seems to be, and I will go further to say not even seems to be, that there is a disconnect between the church and its community. And some of the things that people have pointed out have been along the lines of membership. If you are not a member of this particular church, the resources and the assistance is limited or not available at all. So that's one disconnect that the church has. They'll be in the community, but if you're not a member of that church, you're limited in how you're engaged. And then there's the fact of what the church would call evangelism. But I wouldn't say evangelism in the area of preaching Jesus Christ. I'm talking about evangelism in the sense of getting people involved in situations that improve their lives, like the economic piece, like forming the different programs that we're talking about, and then engaging the community in a way where they're welcomed, even if they're not a member of your church. But I think that church membership is a key point to where they're able to exclude you or include you. And I think that needs to be lifted. It needs to be just, let's be in the community, since we're all in this community, membership or not, we have these things and resources available, come through. Also, let's start forming better relationships. Bishop was talking about partnership with the community and partnership with the businesses. Get an ecosystem flowing. And I think that's the responsibility of all of us. And of course, since we're talking about the church today, I put special emphasis on the church being responsible to start engaging in these things. So that's the answer I'll put forth for right now.
That's good. That's good.
If I can make a comment in on that, I want to go back to the question that was sent in, that has that of what are we to think about what is in the community surrounding the physical church and the places that people are living. And how does that all fit into all this? And it absolutely is relevant. It's relevant because it's a reflection of what's being invested in. And again, I'm going to operate from some simple premises that maybe too maybe too Pollyannish or too faith oriented, that they just don't seem practical. But here it is. I know that our God is a God of abundance. And I know that in the church, there is abundance that is flourishing, that can be directed into missional cause, coming right out of the church with a successful business person who can direct resources that can adopt the missional cause of caring about the environment around the church. We just need to get intentional about learning how to assign missional cause to businesses that use that missional cause as a way of also creating healing and healthiness of spirit in their businesses. There is not a disconnect between the healthiness of the spiritual core of a business and its prosperity in business. It works that way. It reflects the principles and character that makes it attractive as a business. When we connect the faith walk and the business engagement as in a desire to do that, which is create economics, and economics can do much to affect. And it is unfair for us to pretend that the environment and the places that fail to give healthiness of community are irrelevant to the fact that some just can hardly see hope and abundance when there's such despair in their eye. That needs to be a missional cause adopted by those who have resources. We just need to get intentional about it. I believe this is a grieving time for our, this is a time when you see the despair going on with people feeling that they do not even have hope and dream, going all the way to the heart of Manuel's work, which is releasing entrepreneurs. And entrepreneurs need to create more. And in doing that, they need to invest it back. They need to realize why they are creating. The creator inspired them with that capability to do that. And they need to get about moving on that. And I want to see that going on because we're way underperforming. And I just simple.
Yeah. So I appreciate those sentiments. But I would kind of take those sentiments and situate them within. I've heard you say intentionality, which I think is vitally important. But I want to take your comments and situate them with intentionality of how do we deal with institutional and structural racism? How do we deal with the intentionality of a system? This is just for the group. The intentionality of policies, the intentionality to ensure that we have the haves and the have-nots, and this impact on, to James Cohn's point, how is it translating, which is what the person in the comments asked. How does it translate to the despair? How is it translating? How are we being intentional with that? And yeah, so you can,
so let me start, and I want to try to get to this notion of businesses, because that's what I was invited. That's what Manuel said this was going to be about. So I do want to get back to that and say pre-1970, our communities had thriving businesses. Sam, we had that. We had exactly what you were saying. And I'm not going to try to say what were all of the reasons for our losing it. But we had systemic racism, but we thrived, and we thrived because there was this supporting each other. There was this connectivity. How do we get that again? That's one piece. That's one piece. Secondly, again, how do I as a leader, and let's say, Don, you were a member and you're a business owner. How do I help you, one, see your business as mission? help you see your business as mission, both in its profitability and in what it does in serving a community good? How do I create the atmosphere whereby you and others collaborate and create an ecosystem? How do I help incent moving you and others from seeing things from supplier diversity to supply chain? So rather than you trying to get a bid on a part of a supplier diversity program, to you being in collaboration and partnership with others to say, no, we're going to be the supply chain, right? Right? How do I shift your mind, your sensibility, and incent your acting on those things? How then do I work, as Sam said, with this social capital and bringing money to bear to help that grow? What I've just outlined to you is what I'm involved in doing right now. You haven't heard it. There'll be a big splash later, right? But that's the work that we have to be able to do. And then I'll shift it one step further. How then do we stop seeing a yes or no in the United States as being the ceiling? When we have brothers and sisters across the water wanting to do business with us, wanting to create avenues of distribution, right? Right? How do we do that as well?
Love that. And I appreciate you taking us there. So how do we recapture the former prosperity in the midst of all of the, structural, institutional things that we've dealt with? How do we create incentive structures that provide service to community, that where you can see your business as mission? And then how do we create a framework by which it has diasporic implications? Brother Marifa.
Before I answer those questions, I'd like to just point out that the original question talking about seeing the impact of, let me matter of fact, I'm gonna pull that way I get it right, where she was talking about connecting. How does it translate? And I would say that it does not translate. I just want to make that clear, that it does not translate. That's the disconnect we're talking about. And as far as our state, well, I'll get off of that. I won't comment on what we were living like in the 60s. I would just simply say, look at the political climate of that time, and that would show you why we were doing what we were doing as a result of being excluded from economic activity. So as far as developing an infrastructure now, I think that's a great point. It's something that needs to be done. It's what every group has done to achieve success. It's what our legacy is prior to being invaded and being brought to a poverty-like state. We were pooling our resources. We were a unified community. And so I would point to the psychology before we get to that infrastructure, which would be an outworking of how we work as a group. And I would say putting an emphasis on unity and removing the things that cause Black people to look at each other and say, I don't want to work with you. I don't want to partner. I can't trust you. Economics, the foundation of it is social relationship based on trust. If I can't trust you, I'm not going to build with you. And I think there's been things that have been implanted in our psyche that cause us to see ourselves as being untrustworthy and unreliable. I can't depend on you. I can't trust you. And a lot of that, to bring it full scale, and I believe in being in your face and dealing with the reality of things. I think all that is encompassed in that N word that we have used for each other. And I know we've tried to flip it into a term of endearment, and it has power in the original meaning, but the N-word has become something that captures all those things within it. The fact that I can't trust you, I can't rely on you, and it speaks to your ability and skill set, which are of low par, inferior. You see what I'm saying? And so I think we have to uproot all of these things through education and knowledge and wisdom, including our history, that will exclude and eliminate and cure the mindset, so that now when I see my brothers and sisters, I say, yo, I can depend on them. I trust them. I want to do business with them. I want to partner with them. So I think right before we get to that infrastructure, that we deal with the psychology, the mindset of our people. And once we cure that, I believe everything will line up and fall into place.
Appreciate that. Sam, within the context of the psychology of collaboration, and the need to shift a kind of a mindset from the grassroots to the grass top, those that have access, those that need it. What type of psychology and how do we institutionalize that? Because I hear Dr. Alexander and I hear his sentiments. And I believe that there are some best practices that we need to institutionalize. How do we go about doing that? And how do we go about creating an infrastructure that teaches the right from both sides, the right psychology one needs to have in order to collaborate and get that access?
You know, I don't know that I'm qualified to answer that kind of question. So what it does for me is actually what happened in anticipating with the kind of quality questions that were prepared for us before we all came together. I found myself anticipating how humbling it is to enter into such big subjects as institutional matters that I can't begin to grasp. And so I prayed. And so I would say, again, God is a God of abundance. I believe God is the creator, and I don't have answers about the things I don't understand about the inequities. But I can tell you that in that humility, there comes this beautifulness of getting a chance to sit in and listen and try to understand. And I can tell you what will last is if my understanding occurs, not because I'm having a sense of guilt because I haven't done something well enough, or my ancestors haven't, or that doesn't last. It lasts when I care about you, like I care about you. I care deeply about you. Like, I really like old Taya. She hadn't said a thing over there, but I like her and I care about her. And I want to see the generation she's going to affect make a difference. So that makes me dig deep. And I can tell you now, I know what we have in common is that we have a heart that's inflamed with passion to break chains that have caused people that right now, just as we're together, we care about each other. We have to find a way to organize that to create sustainability in this, that it begins to get intentional and moves it. We're right about something. There's probably a big deficit, disproportionate deficit in the Black business owner pre-owners. They're not being prepared properly in how to begin to be entrusted. Because let me tell you, there's black, there's white, and there's green. And green is money. And money likes to go where it is safe. But there is good money in the body, There's millions beyond millions that will invest, that are faith dollars in responsible businesses. Most of those won't invest in businesses that don't have readiness. They might throw some guilt money at it, but they won't invest. So intentionality of developing this, let me tell you, God is readying the body to respond to your voice. If you don't put your fist in its face and just try to intimidate it. I know it. I can feel it in my soul. So my view is you get introduced to capital that wants to come in, but you can't intimidate it. You have to earn it. But you say, and we have to overcome the things that have caused identity inferiority at the root of this. I got it. Well, let me tell you something. Manuel's doing it. He's trying. He's striving. That's the kind of stuff that those will break. The Bishop is out in front, speaking into it. I believe the most important thing that Bishop does, because he's done it to me. I've listened to him, and I know who he is to people like Dr. Laniak and many others in this world, including Barbara Peacock. I think I know her too. But he is softening the hearts and convicting those who are resourced to attend on growing closer to those brothers and sisters that are preparing for, because God does not desire this oppression. This is a bad thing. This is a bad thing, but no one's going to fix it by simply throwing entitlement dollars to you. You've got to get a pathway to allow you to learn how to multiply what you have. I don't know what that equals yet. I'm not trying to figure it out. I'm struck by it. I want you to, there are resources that will move toward healthiness and readiness. I hear many things have occurred that have absolutely not given the message that there's hope and opportunity for this. And this notion of moving up the supply chain and getting, I appreciate doing business black to black and whatever else that does that says you're supposed to do that. I really desire that we start doing businesses healthily, because we are doing businesses with the people that we have earned the trust with, because we desire, and we've got to break the barriers that open this up. And those are my just first gut reactions.
No, I appreciate that. I think you answered the question well. Intentionality of investment, proximity, right? How do we create tangible pathways, to access and resources? I would say this, as we kind of wrap up this conversation, in thinking about the ecosystem, what are 1 to 2 actions that we need to take? And I would like for us to keep in mind sustainability, institutionalization. I would also like us to keep in mind scalability. What are the 1 to 2 actions that we need to take to cultivate a more equitable ecosystem for Black business? And I love the awkward silence for that second, but I would again.
I was waiting for Bishop. I want Bishop to get it, let's go.
All right, so I will say 2 things, Don. And one, an openness to partnership and collaboration. That has to be key. If I am a one lawnmower landscape operation, I cannot scale if I stay at one lawnmower, right? And so do I have an openness to collaboration and partnership? I think that is one step that has to be taken.
Thank you for that. The willingness. We often say that there is a distinct difference between wanting to win and willing yourself to victory. There's a distinction. Brother Marifa.
Yes, sir. I would say, in addition to what Bishop Alexander is talking about, I'm going to bring it back to what I engage in also, which is disseminating knowledge. And knowledge along the lines of our historical legacy. It's very important that we know who we were prior to any enslavement, or we will continue to look at things that aren't necessarily progress as being things to be celebrated. First Black to do this, first Black to do that type of attitude, when in fact you are the creator of these things. You're not the first Black of the last group to do it. It's very important to get that Sankofa connection. Sankofa is talking about returning to the source. It's going back in the past to fetch it and bring it to the present and using it to go forward. And there's so many details in our history. History is a social science that can develop us and cure things now so we can develop things going forward. One of those things prior we were talking about was that relationship. We'll build those relationships. We'll heal the negative identity that we have for ourselves. And then we'll feel that we're worthy of this economic prosperity, that we deserve this, and that we'll get hungry for it. That's one thing I'm hoping people will become. Either one, become so hyped up about what we can become, or become disgusted, because being disgusted or being upset, that can also bring about a change. You ever been in one of those situations where you're like, you know what, enough's enough. That's it. From now on, it's going to be like this. I want us to take on an attitude similar to that. That's something I want us to do. And I think when you have classes and you're going over information and you're doing study, that these things start to develop. New information comes in, which forms a new belief, which forms a new attitude. And these things can drive you. Now you have determination. Now you have perseverance. Now you have the confidence. Now you're being grateful for what's happening. All these things. So I really think taking the time to study the history, and I think the church can really play a role in that. A Tuesday class, a Monday class outside of your service. So you have that spiritual aspect and you have that historical aspect. And history does so much. So that's what I'll submit in addition to what Bishop said.
Thank you for that, good brother. Sam, we'll let you get the last word on this particular question regarding the ecosystem and 1 to 2 things that you see that that could be beneficial to business.
Okay, so right out of the bat, I'm going to take a baby step, and that's with Manuel, and I'm going to let Manuel know that he's going to have access to my resources, and he can give them away to his, invest them carefully, but give them without any associated cost given to. I would encourage anybody listening and any church person that is saying, what can we do in our church? I have put years into this in these last years of my career of designing to give scalability to the entrepreneurial journey in the context of Kingdom Builder. If you go to kingdom-builder.org, and that is all free information, that is no cost, invested to give you information that lets the journey get real and in organized dialogue, 5 sessions intended to, and it is watching what happens. I already know there are kingdom builders who have been a part of that dialogue that are wanting to know how to put their hand on other kingdom builders. I plan to use Manuel as somebody who's probably going to be fired up about that. So that's concrete 2. 3 is I'm going to pray that God's will be done in this, and that the leaders like the bishop who are out there courageously speaking boldly for the consciousness, which really ties back to Marifa's point, which is we are not going to do this out of, we've got to face what change we've had put on ourselves, but we've got to break out of this and understand this is a spiritual stronghold, and this is not the best that God has designed for us. We are better than this as a people, as folks of faith, and we need to dig in and take our small individual responsibility. I'm counting on Manuel. If nothing comes of this, Taya, you should blame him. That's all.
So gentlemen, I appreciate you, Manuel, Taya. I appreciate you guys allowing me to facilitate this conversation. It's definitely been a blessing. I have my notes for sure, and I'm looking forward to more dialogue and also collectively putting our hands to the plow to move this agenda forward. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay.
You all have been amazing. Thank you so much, Don, for moderating, and all of you as panelists. I recap some of what's been said throughout the conversation. I realize we're over time, so I will not do that today, but I do encourage you all to go and take a look at the Facebook thread. I appreciate everyone who's online with us right now. This has been the most active Aspire Conversations topic that we've had. So I know that there's still more work to do. I encourage you to go in and respond. And I certainly make the commitment alongside each of you to do my part in helping to build this ecosystem, which is definitely important to me personally, but also in the work that I get to do with Aspire and building up the community of entrepreneurs that we service here. So thank you for everything that you've done. Before I close this out officially, I do want to just reference Bishop Alexander in your chat. One of the calls to action, I just want to make sure that I give some note to this. Call to action is to really make sure that we are utilizing Ubuntu. I am because we are, right? We are because I am. We got to use our own African principles to save us. We can't wait for anyone else to come through and save us. But these conversations are for everyone to have a seat at the table, so we get this diverse perspective of everything that's being offered. Kuti Shagalia, we have to be self-determined to get the work done. We have to want it. So I know Bishop Alexander is doing great work, even in Africa. And we'll talk about that later, Bishop. But you are already doing the great work, and everyone in this panel is doing the great work. We have to want it. We have to want to change. We have to shift the mindset. And then the Ujima, right? We got to make sure that we're connecting, that we're collaborating, that we understand that there's more collective that we can do than on our own. So I love the whole supply chain representation of let's figure out not how to just be this one person or one entity, but let's expand and run this thing and do what we know we have been born and instilled in us to do. So I'm just so personally grateful for everything that you all have offered. Thank you. I want to turn it over to Manuel to have any closing words, and then I'll get us closed out.
And thank you, Taya, for that. And this, again, an amazing panel. Thank you, Don, for moderating. I would like to extend the challenge to each person on this panel. Bishop Alexander, I'm here to work with you. Aspire Community Capital, we have a business training program. We have business coaching and mentorship, as we've discussed today, as well as we're launching an Access to Capital program. Let me know how we can work with you. Marifa, I love your insight and your thought leadership, in particular around education and the historical element that you bring to understand the economics, as well as the historical significance of where we are now. Please come teach a class to my program participants. Sam, you've already extended, a great wealth of information and access to Aspire. I thank you for that. So, but if we can't practice what we preach, and we can't collaborate together with just the people on this panel, then this last hour conversation has been very short-sighted and has been unworthy and unwelcome discussion. And I don't think anyone on this panel wants that. So I extend the opportunity for us to work together, for us to collaborate, for us to break down the barriers that we may have structured. And now let's see how we can have an impact, because we can go and do it. Don, you're the coach, so you're going to coordinate all of this. But at the end of the day, it's about us being able to work together and have impact. And I need each of you to help me be successful, as it is just as imperative for me to help you to be successful.
Mm-hmm.
That's perfect. That's perfect. Thank you, Manuel. So on that note, I just want once again to say I am deeply grateful for everyone involved in this panel today. Thank you to Don, our moderator. Thank you, Sam, Marifa, Bishop Alexander, Manuel. We appreciate you. We want to thank our sponsor as well, Start Us Up, which is a Kaufman Foundation initiative, and all of our community partners who help us get the word out. Helping us with, social media posts, newsletters, whatever it is to share what the Aspire Conversations is all about. And that includes Wells Fargo Foundation, Packard Plays, RevTech Labs, My Brother's Keeper, which is Don's organization, Stiletto Bosch University, and the amazing team and board here at Aspire. Special shout out to Andy Muick, who is always sending us amazing resources. He brought Sam to us. We're grateful for that. And I know Andy personally has reached out to people today to be part of this conversation and has attended just about every Aspire Conversations that we've done. So Andy, know that we appreciate you. Everyone, you rock. Thank you. And we will see you on December the 17th for our final session of this calendar year, which is going to be on mental wellness, another topic that we as a community do not talk enough about. We hope to see you there. Have a good day.